So our weather app will have a lot of different screens. As you can see here, we have the entry point screen, we have the search screen, we have favorites, we have about, settings, and so forth. So when you look at this is very overwhelming because we have so many things, so many moving parts, as you see. Now, we are going to divide and conquer here. We're going to start small and build up as we continue to build this application. Okay? So let's start small. So how is this navigation going to work? Because we need to go from one screen to the next and so forth. So we're going to start small. We are going to put together a navigation system that will allow us to navigate between screens. The first screen that user will see, it's going to be a splash screen. So the screen is going to be a very quick to show and quick to disappear screen. So it instantly shows, does a little bit of an animation, and then it takes us to the main screen where users can see all of the information about a particular city and its weather and so forth. So this is the basic structure. Now, because we have many other screens, and which we'll take care of it later, we will have to create a broader structure that will allow us to add all of these other screens later when we need to. Let's go ahead and put together the navigation structure first so that it's easier for us later to add other screens onto the navigation. Let's go ahead and do that. Inside of our navigation here, we're going to create our navigation structure. Well, we need two things. One is we're going to create an enum class, which will list all of the possible screens that we want to add into our app project. Okay, let's go ahead and do it so we can see. So I'm going to create a new Kotlin class, and this is going to be just enum. I'm going to call this weather screens, like this. As you can see, it's enum, which means we can add a list of whatever we want. And I'm going to do that. So the first one is going to be splash screen. And the second one, I'm going to have a main screen as such, and about screen, favorite screen, and I'm going to use a settings screen as well. Now, is it necessary to do this way? Not really, but it's always nice to separate the concerns, to have one place that is dedicated for all of the enumerated screens and so forth. As you will see later, it's a way better to do this as opposed to having to add all of these routes in our navigations when we are putting everything together. Okay, so this is real great because then if our app changes, our managers, whoever is managing our project, they decided that we need to add a different screen, it's much easier to come here in one place and add that screen as such. Okay, so next I'm going to create the actual another class here, which is going to be our weather navigation. So Kotlin class, call this weather navigation. All right, so what is this weather navigation going to do? Well, first of all, this weather navigation is going to be the class that will have the nav controller, which is going to be a class that comes with Compose, Jetpack Compose, that has the capability of controlling the navigation to any screen that we may have. So it's going to be a structure that we can create with nav controller, the control that allows us to say, okay, now we're screen A. When we click, we want to navigate to screen B, and so forth. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do here, I'm going to say val, say nav controller, and it's going to be a nav controller type like this, or actually I'm going to say is equal to remember. Now we're having a problem here because this, if you have always going to say, well, this has to be inside of a composable. That's true. That's why I'm going to change this to just a function to say that this is indeed composable. Actually, that's not everything that we must do. We must also say composable like this. Okay, now it all works. If you hover over, you can see it says creates a nav host controller that handles the adding of the Compose navigator. Well, next, what we need to do, we have the controller, but we have to have that nav host. Nav host, as the name implies, going to be the host of all of our composable. In this case, all of our screens users can go to. So I'm going to say nav host as such. We need that nav controller. I'm going to pass our nav controller, right? Because it will need to know how to do things like go to or navigate to X composable or screen. Now, we're going to have some problems right away because if you have over nav host, it's going to say, well, I need some more information. One of which is I want a starting point, a start destination. So I'm going to actually go ahead and say start destination like this because the nav host needs a starting point. Where do we start in this whole navigation realm, right? What is the first screen I'm going to show to the user? Well, in this case, I'm going to say weather. I'm going to go use the weather screens, right? It needs the route. In this case, I want the search, actually, is the splash screen dot name. Notice that we haven't created the actual screen, but we're just adding here, this is going to be the route per se, the address to where to get that splash screen. Once we've done that, then if you see that we now have, let's put this in a new line, you can see now we can create that actual nav graph builder. So now we can create the actual screens composable that needs to be attached in our nav host. Remember, this nav host, think of a place where we're going to put all of the screens because nav host will know how to host that navigation. That's why the naming nav host, navigation host. It hosts all of the navigation. We must pass the controller, nav controller, so we need to know how to navigate, right? Nav controller knows how to do that. And we have to pass a starting point, right? The start destination. We start at splash screen. And then inside, now in this Lambda, this is where we construct our navigation, right? In the form of composables. The first one, I'm going to say composable, right? And you can see if you say composable, it says route. I'm going to pass the route. Where is this composable that we want to go to? Right? Then I'm going to say weather. Again, actually weather screens. I'm going to splash screen name, just like what we did here. So here we are saying the start destination is going to be this route. But now we're going to create the actual composable that needs to be shown when we hit this start destination. Okay, and then, of course, another Lambda here, this composable. This is where then I'm going to create the actual composable, the actual screen. So I'm going to say weather. We haven't created this. Splash screen like that. And I'm going to pass it nav controller because we will need that later. Okay. All right, so there we go. So we don't have that. We're going to create that rule. Inside, I'm going to say Command N to create a new Kotlin class. It's going to be a file because it's going to be a composable. And I'm going to paste in the name that I just created, weather splash screen. Actually, this has to be splash, not splash. Okay, like that. And I'm going to create a composable. Yes, it is indeed a composable. As such, say fun. And I'm going to use the same name. That's fine. And then here, I'm going to pass a nav controller. Like that. That's the type that's needed. And voila. So for now, I'm just going to put ahead a text, a very sad text that says splash screen like this. Okay, let's go back to our nav controller like that. Everything should be good. Right, we're going to say splash like this. Oh, splash with an H. And we have to import later weather splash screen. Let's type again, weather splash screen. Ah, that's because I didn't change there as well. Okay. Let's say weather splash screen like this. Very good. Okay, so just a quick recap here what we've done. We created this weather navigation composable. This is going to host all of the navigation that we need to do in our app. And notice that I created this enum here, just for simplicity, where I list out all of the possible screens we're going to need. First one is going to be a splash screen, which, as you see, we've just used that. So we created this weather navigation. We have to have a nav controller, which controls the whole navigation, allows us to say, okay, let's go navigate to X screen, right? And all of that has been driven inside of a nav host. Inside our nav host, we have to pass that nav controller. because it needs that control to know how to navigate to X screen. And we have to pass a starting destination. Where do we start in this navigation? Well, we start at splash screen. But that's not everything. Then inside, we create the actual graph. This is inside of our nav host, because our nav host hosts all of the navigations. What are these navigations? Well, these are composable. They're just screens. So we say composable. We pass the route. In this case, the route is going to be weather screen splash.name. Okay, this is the best way to do it. And then we construct, and then we pass the actual screen composable, where we can show, in this case, we just have a text splash screen. All right, that's all we're doing. And this is wonderful. That means every time we want to add a new screen, we can go to our weather screen. We add that screen here, right, just as an enum. And then our weather navigation, we can create the same thing, that are composable. We can copy that and paste it all here, change the route here. Instead of splash screen, could be something else, as you will see, and then create the actual composable, which in this case we created a splash screen like this. Obviously, we will create something new to where users can go to. All right, I'm going to get rid of this, and that's the structure that we need to put together.